in and around 2011, 2012, an American high school student by the name of Jack Andraka, you may know this name, developed by himself a novel test for detecting early-stage pancreatic cancer. And let me tell you, that's quite an achievement for a teenager, you will understand. And he was a teenager. By the time, actually a month after he turned 16, he gave a TED lecture, a TED lecture on the topic, and I advise everyone to see that lecture. I very much like it. And Jack Andraka clearly is a very keen, bright, young researcher, the type of researcher we want to solve big problems. And it is in our best interest of all of us to make sure that we have many bright, young researchers coming up, aligned for the future. And one way to get that done is education, obviously. And high school education, I think, is where that should start. We typically think of research and academia in universities, university education. But I firmly believe that should start in high school. And one way in which we actually educate students towards becoming maybe a researcher or a great mind is via science projects in high school. And that's what I want to talk about, science projects. Don't worry about the slide disappearing, I just made that happen. Yeah, sometimes people worry. We use science projects in an expectation that students will learn the intricacies of science, the principles of science, things like how to formulate a hypothesis, how to test a hypothesis, maybe how to construct a rational argument, how to deal with data, how to reflect on your own results, how to report the results so that other people can understand them and maybe verify them. That's what we expect from science projects. That's why we give our high school students science projects. But here's the thing, and this is what I want to talk about these science projects. These science projects are not intended to, no, let me go back one step. I just mentioned a few principles of academia, of general academic thinking, and there's one that's actually missing from this list that I believe, and that is academic freedom. Academic freedom is something that I did not mention, that is very often not mentioned to high school students as a principle of science. All the other things are, but not academic freedom. And I believe that's a very, not a good thing. That's my message for today. Academic freedom to me is the option or the choice that you have as a scientist, as a researcher, to study your own interests, to pursue your own interests. And in the real world of academia, of science, that is not an easy thing. It's not a given thing that you can do that, which I'm happy about that it isn't, because we need to solve big problems, and we cannot do that if every scientist just goes pursuing whatever they want to pursue. So we need to pull our resources together. We need to focus our attention in the same direction to solve big problems, sustainability problems, healthcare problems, energy problems, etc. And but these big problems are not the type of problems that I believe high school students should be working on in their science projects. And I believe that high school students should be working on much more playful projects, should be working in a much more playful manner when it comes to academic thinking, academic doing science. And that's what I really want to talk about, academic playfulness for students. That is really my message for today. But I'll give you two examples of projects that I find nice examples of academic playfulness. And admittedly, they're not high school projects, I have to admit that. They're projects from my own students. But as an example, they serve very well, I think. And the first one, to explain this, you need to understand that I always tell my own students, and I tell many high school students in the Netherlands, I always tell them, if you want to research something and you don't know what yet what, then look at your own surroundings, look in your own life, make observations of what happens to you in your daily life. Ask questions of what's going on around you. Really simple observations, personal inspirations, personal interests are a great starting point for scientific research. And having said that to my own students, a few years ago, one student walked into my office, and his name is Wim van Eck, and he said, Maarten, I made an observation in my daily life. He said, I like to play computer games. And every few months or so, I buy a new computer game because the old one is becoming boring. But he said, I made a second observation, and that is that I have a cat. And I don't buy a new cat every few months because it becomes boring, So he said, could it be that there's a quality in the behavior of my cat that is not in the behavior of the opponents that I fight in the computer games. And these are computerized opponents, algorithmic opponents. And he said, and if so, if that is the case, could it be that this quality is transferable to a video game if I do not play it against a computerized opponent, but against my cat or any other animal? That's the question he came in with. I think that's a really nice question to start doing research. So we talked about it, and we both concluded cats are horrible to use in science. They're unpredictable and too big, too expensive. People love them too much. So we decided to settle with a different type of animal, an insect, namely crickets. And Wim devised by himself this experiment that I kind of like and I want to tell you about, and it revolves around a game known as Pac-Man. You probably know it. It's a maze game. And Wim built this small version of Pac-Man. And in this version of Pac-Man, the 4 ghosts, Inky, Pinky, Blinky, and Clyde, were not controlled algorithmically by a computer algorithm, some computer code. No, they were controlled by crickets, real living crickets. And these crickets did not only live, they lived inside a facsimile maze of the one in the game that Wim had built out of scrap bits of wood. And the crickets would live in there, walk around, and they were monitored by a webcam, and their positions were tracked and used as positions for the ghosts in the game. As such, Wim could play Pac-Man against crickets. And he used this setup, and it was technically maybe slightly more difficult, but not much. And as such, he could study the question that he set out to study. And in that sense, the project could have been better in terms of research, could have definitely been improved. However, what I really like about it is that it is a nice research that came from the personal inspiration of a student and that really engaged that student in scientific research. Even so much so that years after this project, Wim decided to do a PhD on animal-incorporated computer games. That he's working on his PhD in this field right now. This is how engaged he got into science. And that should be the point of science projects in education. That should be the point of science projects in education. Let me tell you about a second project. Another student, his name is Rinus Bot, he came into my office and he said, Maarten, I have an idea. You know these huge flocks of birds, they fly around in the sky and it's really beautiful. I guess you know what I'm talking about. He said, I want to control them. I want to fly my drone into these flocks of birds and want to take control over the whole flock. I want to be able to steer that flock where I want them to go. Well, that is quite an ambition, quite an ambitious project. And we soon decided that is very difficult because you have no idea how to construct these flocks of birds. Or even if you don't want to construct them, you have no idea where to find them or when to find them. So let alone be there with your drone and then hope that you can control them. So we immediately saw, that's a bit of a difficult project. But me as an educator, I am an educator, I told him, let's work on this idea. Let's talk about it. So we talked about it. And we concluded that his actual interest was really in the interaction between drones and birds. That had his fascination. That is what he really wanted to know. That was underlying his first project proposal. So then we said, well, let's study that then. So that's what Rinus did. And he did it in this, what I find, a very nice way. What he did is for last summer, for several weeks, and I'm talking 4 or 5 weeks, he got up every morning between 5 and 6 and went to the local park near his house. And he would feed the birds there. Just put some birdseed around and some mealworms. And you can actually, oh, sorry, wrong button. You can actually see them here. They're in the middle, the worms and the birdseed. It was a very low-cost experiment. It had a small camera, a smartphone, and an off-the-shelf drone that he already owned, and a weight scale to measure the weight of the worms and to see how much were eaten by the birds from the container. He would basically feed the birds. What he did, he put the camera right next to the food, and it would observe birds eating his birdseed and his mealworms. Rinus himself would be sitting away 100 meters, ready with his drone. And every time, well, he could actually see the birds, he could see the camera feed. So every time he saw a bird entering the feeding zone, he would conceptually throw a dice. He would make a random decision. And this random decision had 3 possible outcomes. 1, he wouldn't do anything. That was the first option. The second option was his drone would take off. And it would fly 100 meters straight towards the bird, basically attacking it. And once it reached the bird, it would whoop, fly back and land. That was the second option. Or the third option was when a bird landed, the drone would take off and it would fly in a straight line, not at the bird, but past it. That's a sort of flyby maneuver. And then it would return. And all the time, Rinus was filming the location of the food, where the food was, where the birds were. And every day, after he got back from 2 hours in the morning spending in the park, he would analyze his footage very meticulously, frame by frame, and he would note down the exact frame numbers when a bird appeared in the shot and when it left. And he knew what type of birds they were. He also knew what the condition was. Was there no drone? Was there an attacking drone? Or was there a flyby drone? And by noting all this data and correlating bird species to the time that they spent feeding, to the condition under which the drones flew, he could actually discover how different species of birds react differently to drones, which is very important. It's a topic. It was on the radio recently that one of the city councils in Holland wants to use drones to detect illegal marijuana growth. And the people were saying, we can't do that because we do not know how birds react. Well, thanks to a single student with a radically absurd idea, we do now. And we're currently writing a journal article for a biological journal, Rinus, me, and someone from the biology department, based on his data. Why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because I told you academic playfulness is such an important thing to engage students in the process of science at a young age, preferably at the high school level. That is the perfect time. And maybe you're thinking, yeah, Maarten, okay, so we agree, that's it. Well, let me surprise you, that's not really the point I'm making. What the point I want to make is that academic playfulness should be made more explicit in high school education, at least as I see it around me in science projects. Students should be told that they can study whatever it is that they want to study. They should be told that. They should be told that the topics that they select can be from their personal inspiration, their personal fascination. Be it, I don't know, hard rock, be it hockey, whatever. They can study whatever they want. That really is my message. And by doing that, by engaging young people in the process of science and acting scientifically, we basically put forth a stronger generation of future scientists that we really need to solve big world problems.